Salt of the Earth Farm Stories. Step into the world of farmers from diverse backgrounds across Australia. Through intimate interviews, host Darren Grigg delves into farming practices, traditions, and the challenges farmers face in nurturing the land.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Kiewa Catchment Landcare groups, supporting those who care for land and community.
I'm very passionate about grazing being an art form, not necessarily a science.
G'day, I'm Darren Grigg, and today's guest is Jason McAinch, a grazing management champion, and quite frankly, a fascinating fella. We head into the art of rotational grazing, and yes, Jason calls it an art form, not a science. It's about finding the right balance, working with Mother Nature, not against her. We'll talk about the crucial role of plant recovery before grazing, how leaf area acts like a solar panel charging the plant's internal battery, and why green plants are the key to turning sunlight and carbon dioxide into life-sustaining sugars. Jason doesn't hold back, from the dangers of Phalaris staggers in livestock to setting strong foundations in the paddock. He reckons farmers are the greatest researchers of all time, and after this chat, you might just agree. And you may even hear how Jason managed to get caught in his PJs. This one's packed with insights and laughs. Let's get into it. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning.
Mate, tell me, you grew up on a dairy farm near Gippsland, is that right?
That's correct. So I was born down near the Wilson's Proms. That was the first dairy farm there on the family dairy farm, and then moved to place called Denison near Hayfield in the McAllister Irrigation District.
Right.
Yeah, so we started off there, mum and dad, milking around 200 cows, which was big numbers in those days, in the 80s. And when I finished dairy farming in the late 2008, we're milking up to 500 cows.
Really? On a rotary?
Yeah, big 50 stand rotary. Yeah, so we built that in the 2000s. So
That's a lot of milk.
a lot of milk, a few staff, managing, at the time, a reasonable enterprise.
And what sparked your passion for grazing management at such an early age?
Well, I suppose I wasn't that early. You know, I enjoyed farming, went off to university. My parents made sure that we weren't to stay home directly on the farm. We had to go off and experience something else. So I went off to uni, which was a great experience.
What did you study?
I studied science, and E. coli was what I did in genetics in my honours year. So almost completely useless, but I had a great time doing it, and many stories. But, you know, it was eye-opening for me. And then finished that in the mid-90s, and we were in the recession that we had to have. So found it a bit of a struggle to get some work. So I started back working on the family farm. And then in 2000, my great mentor, she's become my great mentor, Kate Myrams, asked me to apply for a job with the Department of Ag in Ag Dairy Extension. And that was just fantastic. And that's found something that I really enjoyed doing as well as farming. So sort of carried on farming a little bit on the weekends because I was staying on the farm, of course, and working during the week. Then as things happen, change of foot, my mum passed away, succession planning, getting married, wanted to sort that out. Then as a result of me pushing probably pretty hard for a certain solution, I found myself moving away from the farm and focusing on sort of grazing and working with the Department of Ag back then.
As an extension officer?
As an extension officer. And then as those things happened, they wanted redundancies. And at the time, my wife had a good job offer. So I became a stay-at-home dad for the next 7 years.
Did you really?
And that was brilliant. So I still only work part-time. My wife is a full-time income earner. And I'm the one that has to, as you found out this morning, pack the kids up and get them out the door. 3 teenage kids now. It's let's say it's diverse in all its ways. So.
And it would have been a little bit better if the host of the show didn't turn up 15 minutes earlier.
Well, that was that was okay. That was part of my strategy was to put you off by seeing you in my pajamas. Yeah, put you on the back feet. It's one of those strategies you learn.
Yeah, sorry about that, mate. Well, it wasn't a strategy on my behalf, I tell you. And so what's your position now, mate? What are you doing? You're travelling around a little bit?
Travelling around a little bit and doing this kind of work with the Healthy Landscapes program with local councils in Central Victoria is my main gig. And I'm doing a little experiment with doing some consulting up in the Kiewa Valley. Yeah, so just love sharing what I know, the little bit that I know with people, and trying to help them at least make a step forward, or in some cases multiple steps forward in their farming business and grazing journey.
Well, I know Kiewa Catchment Landcare groups are very excited about having you up soon, so look out for that one, listeners. Jace, what does your philosophy, graze the plant when it's fully recovered, mean in practice?
So what it really means is that you're mimicking when the grass wants to be defoliated, because grasses don't lose their leaves like a tree loses their leaves. Yes, they'll die off and sit at the bottom, but they don't lose them. And so the whole premise is waiting for that grass to recover and then graze it. And what that means is we're mimicking sort of the rotation that used to happen on the big grasslands across the world. And so we're waiting for those plants to recover. And what's really fascinating to me is that at the moment, there's a bit of especially here in Central Victoria, a bit of commentary about kangaroos eating Phalaris and getting Phalaris staggers. And to me, that's the plant saying, don't graze me. That's a mechanism to say, I'm not recovered yet, don't graze me. And we see that with other grass plants as well.
What do you mean by the Phalaris staggers? What's that?
So sheep will get it as well. It's when they graze a plant early, they pick up a toxin. Now, how that affects the animals, I'm not really sure of the whole veterinary chemistry of it, but they basically get the staggers as it plays with their... I assume it plays with their muscles in the body. And there are other instances where we know that dairy cows that eat ryegrass too early will get, particularly when they're on the point of calving or around calving, they'll get milk fever because the grasses are saying, we've got too much of this, we're trying to fend you off in a way. So, if you'll notice animals, they'll sometimes look at a plant and not graze it because it's not recovered. They can smell it. The classic one that, I often talk about, I've made lots of mistakes, so that's how I've learnt things. For those people that are fortunate enough to not make many mistakes, they're smarter than me, but I had to learn it through making mistakes. So I've made cows crook from eating millet too soon or sorghums too soon, and they'll get certain poisonings or nitrate poisonings and stuff like that from eating these grass plants before they're recovered, before they're ready. So that's the idea behind what we're trying to achieve, is wait for these plants to recover and then rotationally graze them. And getting the balance of that is really important. And I'm sure one of your questions there is about animal health, and that leads, what I'm talking about there is if we are able to give them a consistent diet that's recovered grass, that's good for them. It's good for that animal to have a consistent diet as much as possible. And a diverse diet. So it's not just one plant, it's a diverse, a bit like us. We might like Vegemite on toast for 6 days out of 7, but we have to spice it up a little bit sometimes. And
I find it quite fascinating too. Like, I think a sheep can be very particular. They know what they need, and they'll have a little bit of that plant and a little bit of that plant for their diet. I think a kangaroo's the same.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how a cow goes, whether they are as selective.
Well, not quite as selective, because usually they've got a much, and it depends on what's available and how much of it is available as they're moving through that area. So I often say in my courses, though, is that if the animal's able, it's almost a myth that the animal's able to pick exactly what it wants, because if that was true, they wouldn't necessarily eat so much clover that it causes them bloat. Yeah, so if cows are eating clover, they'll get bloat. So I think there is this idea that they know what to eat. Now, I intellectualize that by saying, and no one can see me, but I'm a fair few kilos overweight. So, if I can intellectualize by saying I shouldn't eat that extra bit of cake, but I still eat it. And I think animals, to some extent, will choose, just like us. Sometimes we know that we need some vegetables tonight because I haven't eaten any vegetables the last couple of days. But I also think they're not quite sure what they want to eat. But therefore it's our job to actually supply them with a bit of diversity, but a consistent diversity that allows them to eat a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I also say that about, feeding our kids. We talked about being, the father of teenagers. I've seen that our job is to offer them a diverse food for tea. How much of that is up to them to choose, but they've got to have a bit of everything, So I think that's the same with our animals. And I always relate it back to a bit of, what's in my life and what we're trying to achieve too, and think, they're not that different.
Well, you're not that overweight, mate, so you don't need to worry too much. And would you say one farmer might manage his grazing system differently to the one next door?
Oh, absolutely. So, and that's what I'm very passionate about, grazing being an art form, not necessarily a science. And everyone's got a slightly different context. So every farmer has a certain driver. So if you're a certain age and you've got great financial security, you've paid off the farm, the driver for you might not be to buy the next farm. It might be, I'm just really happy in this place. Whereas someone else might be in the stage where they want to drive to buy the next farm, or in a position where the cash flow isn't as healthy as the neighbour, or they're trying to meet a different specification because what they want to do with their animals is different to the one next door. They may have different targets for their market they're trying to meet. So everyone's got different context, and so they can do it differently. I don't make a judgment about that. So everyone's context is different, and then how they manage their grazing is sort of up to them. But what I'm passionate about is for them to understand the pros and cons of those types of decisions, rather than just doing them and not understanding that, if I do this in 6 weeks' time, it's going to result in me having not as much feed as I anticipated, or my plant is not going to tiller as much as I would hope. So that's going to have a flow-on effect further down the line as well. So it's, without making it complex, it's just trying to understand the flow-on effect of some decisions. Now, some of them are going to be quite significant, and some of them are going to be around the margins. And when I was farming for a long time, it was that trying to strive for that last couple of percent, and it was really silly in a way trying to do that, because Mother Nature she's quite a beast. We've been fighting with her for a fair few years now. She's currently undefeated and doesn't look like losing. So, and the other part about Mother Nature is she doesn't need us here, so she'll make the choices that she makes. So I think if we don't fight against her, and try and work with her and not strive to get that last few percent, but understand what we're doing at different times.
Yeah, to take the stress out of it too, if we all realise that, yes, she's always won.
Yep. And she always throws something different at us.
Yeah.
Every season is different. And that's the other thing I often talk about is I've had the great privilege of visiting a lot of farms. And the great privilege that gives me is that I'm able to go and talk to people and share these ideas as if they're my own. I've never had an original idea. They've all come from these smart, intelligent, knowledgeable, farmers that I've learnt things off. And and if I don't go out and have a conversation with a farmer, every few weeks, I think I need that back in my life. I need their intelligence, their wisdom that they've gained from that. So, but in saying that, repeating the same recipe year after year, and this is one of the things I've learnt again from someone else, doing the same thing, following the same recipe year after year for 20 years is not 20 years worth of experience. It's just 1 year repeated 20 times. And, those people that change, adapt, they're the ones that have 20 years of experience because they've tried different things, moved, learnt. I also say that farmers are the greatest researchers of all time. They're always giving something a go. When I worked with the Department of Ag, you'd go to the researchers and at the research farms and stuff like that, and you go, oh, they're researching this. They're at the forefront of research. And my neighbour did that 5 years ago. So a lot of the real innovating farmers, the top 10% that innovate all the time, they're often in front of all the research. So it's often great to actually learn from them and see what they're doing. And by the time the researchers work things out, often they've worked it out well before and moved on to the next way of doing things. So
with the way you've explained that, it's kind of like farmers learning from farmers, but you're this man in the middle sharing all that knowledge.
Yeah, that's what I like to do. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the time I like farmers learning from farmers, learning from themselves. So when I've run courses, it's great to get some good feedback. That's good for my ego. But often on day 3 or day 4 of the courses, I'm sort of standing there going, hello, I've sort of scheduled for me to talk now, and it's sort of going, hang on, these are guys are get out of their way, Jason, get out of their way, let them talk, let them learn off each other. I like to talk about setting the foundations, like a house will build really well and really strong if it's on a good foundation. And so what I like talking about is that foundation stuff. And then, as I said, 2 or 3 days into the course, they're all talking off the same foundation. So your building can be whatever architect you want, and we can drive across the country and see all kinds of different houses, but they're all, if they've been built on good foundations, that's fine. It's terrific. So for me, that's what I'm trying to do is share knowledge, but allow farmers to share it amongst themselves as well.
Yeah, we touched on Mother Nature, Jace. I've heard you talk about harvesting sunlight.
Yep.
I find this fascinating. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so for me, you buy a farm, whatever size that farm is, and I see some of the most passionate farmers are on small acres, 10, 15 acres. They're really passionate about what they're doing. But we buy that farm because it's got this surface area to capture sunlight and rainfall, because they're the only 2 things I think in life that are free, So once you've bought that, that's the 2 things that come for free. No one's charging you for that yet. We'll see, but that's, so what we need then, we've got this surface area and we need to be capturing sunlight, just like a solar panel. We just need to be capturing that sunlight. And the best way to capture that sunlight and make it into something is having a green leaf. Now that green leaf for me, because my bias and my passion is around grazing, is for me it's grasslands. So having a grassland that's able to capture that. Yes, we do need trees and they're really important in the landscape for all the things that they do and the shelter and shade that they provide as well. But, you know, I'm just going to talk about grasses is so that what we need on our property are grasses that are green and growing as much of the year as possible. So what that means is that then they're capturing that sunlight, and those of us that did a little bit of chemistry understand photosynthesis and respiration. So we understand that that's the part where the sun and these green plants are transferring carbon dioxide into sugars. And that's the important part, that then that sugar can go to some other animal, bacteria, fungi, whatever in the life cycle, you know, of the web of life as we talk about. So really important to have these green plants growing year round.
So the green leaf is like a solar panel?
Correct, yep.
And that's charging the ground?
It's charging that plant.
Yeah.
And I say that these plants have batteries. When I started talking about this about 25 years ago, it was really hard to get that concept, but now everyone knows solar panels and batteries. It's fantastic. So, yeah, so in our grazing management, well, you know, firstly, we want the grass to be green and growing. It's capturing sunlight. It's charging its battery. And it's also...
And the battery's in the ground?
And the battery depends on the plant. So it depends on the plant. So with what we call bunched or upright grasses, so they're traditional sort of agricultural grasses, ryegrass, Phalaris, those type of plants that have tufts, they have their battery in the bottom 4 to 5 centimetres of that plant. So if we understand the sort of the makeup of plants, that's where they want to be. In stoloniferous or running grasses, now the classic running grass that most people sort of know about it and not in a particularly nice way is Kiewa. So that running plant, they keep their battery in that runner. And there are other plants which have a bulb, and so they store their sugar in that bulb. So if you think of these plants, these herbs or forbs, they have like a carrot. Why do we eat carrots? Because that's where the energy is. Turnips, those type of plants. But there's lots of other types of plants that have their sugar stored in that part. Why is that important to know is that this plant, and you can sort of see this across the landscape when these batteries are really well charged, is when a grazing occurs, the grass is being grazed, there's no green leaf sort of left. So what's the plant going to do is it uses its battery to push out a green leaf so it can photosynthesize. And so it's going to mine some of that battery power. Now, if I come back and graze that too early, before it's had a chance to start charging that battery up again, the battery becomes weaker. The leaf then becomes smaller that it pushes out because there's not as much energy in the battery. Now, if I come back again too soon, my battery gets smaller, my leaf gets smaller, I grow less feed, it becomes more not as resilient because now instead of having 100% battery, I'm at 10% or 20% or whatever the number is. No one, I certainly don't know what that number is, but I just know that that battery gets less and less until it actually can't cope anymore. And what it also is doing is when the plant is grazed, it is using the soil fungi to actually supply it with nutrients. So there's this symbiotic relationship going on in the soil saying, I am supplying you with sugar because I've done the photosynthesis. You can't get more carbon. I make that sugar for you. So I have this symbiotic relationship with you as fungi. And the fungi says, all right, brilliant. I'll bring you what you need to grow again. And so every time it's eaten, that defoliated or eaten, that grass plant's sending in sugar to the fungi and saying, can you bring me stuff? And because I need this to grow.
So the plant will send sugars out to the fungi?
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah. So, or carbon.
Yeah.
So that's how we get carbon into the soil. So that's the really important part of our grazing mechanism, that we graze. It sends that sugar out. So not only is it using its battery to push out that leaf, it's also using some of their sugars to get nutrients that it needs to grow, whatever that be, nitrogen, phosphorus, any of those type of nutrients. And so if we graze too quickly, again, before that battery has recovered, those plants get smaller and smaller. Their roots get shallower and shallower. I can't support this deep root system anymore. So if you think of a deep-rooted plant, if I keep grazing it too frequently, it gets shallower and shallower roots. What's the problem with that? Well, it's now not accessing as much moisture. It's now not accessing as much nutrients. It's now under stress if it becomes dry or it becomes really wet. It's not accessing, and so it drops off in its resilience. So what we're trying to do with our grazing is not bash that system too hard, and understand that it's only when it's getting close to fully recovered, what we're recovering is the battery. And so that the battery is able to push that big leaf out next time it's grazed, defoliated, mown. For a lot of people that aren't farmers that might be listening to this, think about what happens in the springtime when you mow the grass. You'll see this lime green, bright green colour that day and a half after you've mown the lawn. And that's that battery pushing out that leaf, because it's not a true, it hasn't come from a true photosynthesis in a sense and natural growth. It's being forced out, going, I need to be photosynthesizing. I need to restore my battery. So I'm going to invest in that and do that. So that's the kind of response when you're going, oh yeah, I can see that. I remember that. That's kind of response. Everyone's a bit like that, Darren. So they go, oh yeah, I can see that. And in springtime, you see that. Fascinating. We're doing this in July. I was on a farm at the start of the week, and we could see that on that farm. In the coldest part of the year, we can see the growth that happens in 2 to 3 days because we've looked after that battery. And a lot of data will say, well, we can't grow feed at this time of year. Growth rates are zero. No, that's completely false. When I was dairy farming, we had growth rates when the plant was almost fully recovered at high rates. Now, this might not mean a lot to you, but we were getting growth rates of 60 and 70 kilograms a day on those areas of the farm, close to fully recovered in the middle of July. Now, all the data that you'll read from anywhere would say that's not possible, but it's all to do with battery, letting that first leaf help support. So that leaf is photosynthesizing. It'll help the second leaf grow. Those 2 leaves will help the third leaf grow. Those 3 leaves will help the fourth leaf grow. So you get bigger leaves if everything's temperature and moisture is working okay each time, because you've got this power driving the next growth. So that's the important.
So if we can go into winter with a fully charged battery, if we can, it's been a tough.
This year is almost impossible. Yeah.
But then that gives it more of a chance. If you do get 2 or 3 days of some sunshine, Away she goes.
Away she goes. Yeah, and because it's got a deep root, it's not just that battery, it's that deep root accessing lots of moisture, lots of nutrients, good relationship with all the bacteria and fungi in the soil. All that soil stuff is above my intellect. I glaze over with the soil stuff. It's all I know is there's lots of really great fungi and really great bacteria, really great stuff going in the soil. And if we get our grazing right, we're helping that out.
Yeah.
Because the soil scientists they're in another level.
Yeah.
To me, they're just extraordinary.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling what goes on under there.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I'd be interested too with the fungi, like if we rip a paddock, does it then kill off that fungi?
Yeah, and so some of the research again is sort of sharing that it's a bit like me coming along. You know, the plough is just like me coming along with a big machete and chopping your arms and legs off and saying, keep doing what you're doing, Darren. How would you go doing your job without your arms and your legs? So, yeah, so I'm a big believer that ploughing and that soil disturbance does have an impact. Again, everyone's context is different, so it's not the wrong thing to do. There's no, in my view, there's no wrong. There's just consequences for what you do. So, again, my bias is about grazing management. It doesn't mean I'm always right about all things, far from it, but I have a bias to do that. So if we have to plough a paddock because it's extraordinarily rough or it's just not growing anything at all because the mismanagement has created this really hard crust on top of it, fine, go ahead, plough and manage it so that in a couple of years' time, we have a dense, perennial-based grass system that won't need to be touched for years and years afterwards. Again, I just look back and go, what were these landscapes like before we intervened as supposedly smart, intelligent people? They didn't need fertilizer, didn't need us actively managing them all the time. Again, there was a lot less people, so we've got to put that in context. But trying to make it a simpler system. So, I have a preference. My bias would be to a low risk, low input system. But that's, in some instances, if I've got a rock hard surface, go ahead, plough it, because I need, again, what I was talking about before is I need green plants growing. And so if I haven't got enough green plants growing, I need to intervene somehow because I've made an investment and I want a return on that investment.
And that's why we say ground cover is absolutely crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's all about green plants. So, and there are a diversity of green plants. So we need some green plants that are growing at different times of the year. So again, I liken it to the vegetable patch, so it's no point putting tomato plants in right now in the middle of winter. They are a summer active plant. So for me, there are summer active grasses and winter active grasses. So we need a mixture of those. So we need the winter active grasses growing now. The summer active ones have gone to sleep, just like our fruit trees. They're just gone dormant. So they're not actually growing at the moment. So we need, if we're going to run a grazing enterprise, we need something for our livestock to eat. So we need some winter active plants growing now.
So we're always charging the soil?
Yeah, so we're always capturing that sunlight. So we've always got something green and growing. So, and then in the summertime, we need summer active ones because it's got too hot for the winter active guys. They've gone, nah, it's too hot for me. I'm going to head off. I'm going to go dormant. I'm going to be relaxing down at the beach. You're not going to get any productivity out of me now. It's too hot. And so they go to sleep. They go dormant. And I want my summer active ones to be continuing to grow. It's not to say that our winter active ones won't spark up. If the rain happens, we get a good storm, it gets a bit cooler, they'll grow again. They'll go, oh, the temperature's good, let's have a go at that. But mainly those summer active ones will start firing on all cylinders through that period.
Because we often just talk about a plant going dormant in the winter, but you're saying in the summer as well.
So we have most of the grasses that are actively growing now, hopefully, they'll basically go to sleep. There are certain ones that are accessing deeper roots and cooler systems that may keep going and persist a bit longer, and some of the more modified and bred plants are doing that more and more, those ones that we're selected for. But certainly there's still a winter active and a summer active.
So Jace, can you explain the crown or growth point of a grass plant?
Yeah, it's it'd be a lot easier to do with a whiteboard or some sort of a picture diagram. But if we think about where a grass plant, so what makes a grass plant and not a sedge or something like that, is a grass plant grows from the base of the plant at the soil surface usually, and grows up through the middle and pokes out a flat leaf. So what the crown is really important to understand, is that that's that growing point, what I call the growing point of the plant. And so we need that growing plant to be close to that interface with the soil. For the main reason is that growing point is where that leaf starts to grow. And once that plant has sort of established itself and has recovered, it's doing everything, and conditions are well, it will breed. It'll have a daughter tiller, is what we term. So it'll have a tiller off to the side. So it's creating a new plant. So we see that with why tufted grasses are tufted, because the tiller is growing beside it. So what we want is that growing point to be down near that surface. So when that daughter tiller grows, it's able to then establish its own root system. And I apologise if you can hear my dog having a drink in the background.
All good.
So we need that daughter tiller to have access to the soil. So if we have that growing point nice and low, it has a daughter tiller. That daughter tiller then accesses when it needs to leave home. It's got access to its own root system that's at that soil surface.
And that'll become a mother tiller then?
Eventually, once it's grown and once it's established, it becomes the mother tiller. And why is that important is a lot of these grass plants, not all of them, but a lot of these grass plants in our pastures, we call them perennial, but they're not there year after year after year. They are replacing themselves with their daughter tillers.
Oh, yeah.
Because what happens, and it's the only fancy word I like to show off with, is during the winter, what happens to a lot of our winter active grass plants is it goes through volatilization. It's my only fancy word that I know. And that means it's gone through the winter and it's time for it to send up a seed head sometime when conditions are right. So when that grass plant has gone through the winter and been volatilized, it'll say, right, in the springtime, I'm going to send up a seed head. So that growing point now, whenever that trigger is to say, I'm going to seed now, that growing point becomes the seed head. Why is that important? Because that grass plant, that particular tiller, is now not going to grow anymore, because the growing point has become the seed for the next generation via that seed. So we need that daughter tiller that hasn't gone through that winter period or through whatever the trigger is for it to set seed, for it to be the feed for the next 12 months.
Right.
So it's really important then to have that growing point nice and low so that that daughter tiller can survive on its own once mum's decided that she's going to go to seed.
So that word, volatilization?
Yep.
And that happens mainly in springtime?
Yeah, so it happens through that for certain plants, not all of them, but for certain plants, it happens by it's had those enough cool days or whatever it is that triggers it to have to then say, no, I'm going to seed.
And what happens if we come and graze that seed before it drops to become a daughter tiller?
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference because that plant is still now finished. So lots of times we can see where we've grazed and paddocks won't go to seed because the grazing animal has basically taken off that seed as it's coming up through the stem. So they'll actually graze it, and now that mother is effectively dead. It's not going to do anything because its growing point has become that seed head. So the seed is important for that cross-fertilization and all the other things, or spreading out, in the plant world. But the actual tillering there's no genetic differences happening because it's just a straight up swap of genetic material. Bang.
I've heard you talk about blunt leaves. Is that what happens then?
No, so blunt leaves is when the grazing has happened. So what happens when we graze is that as the plant there'll be a leaf somewhere in its growing, somewhere growing. And after it's been grazed, or chopped off or cut off, probably cut is the easiest way to think about it, is it's been cut off. Some of those leaves were still coming from the growing point. And so they're still going to grow. So they're still coming up through the middle and grow. So they're going to have a flat or a blunt tip, and then they'll start growing. The next leaf will have that spear point on the end of it. So why is that important to understand the blunt tip? That's if we walk around our pasture and look for these blunt tips, we only know that the plant is fully recovered when those blunt tips have started to die off. If they're still actively green and doing some photosynthesization, that plant's not recovered, because grass plants are all different. They're all slightly different. They have different root systems. They have different temperature that they might grow at, different moisture that they might grow at. So for me, I'm not that smart, so I don't know how many leaves all these different grass plants have, So the classic one that everyone likes to say is ryegrass has 3 leaves. It does. It has 3 actively growing leaves. So if we've got 3 fully completed leaves, that plant's recovered. But Phalaris doesn't. Phalaris has 4 or 5 actively grown leaves. And then another plant will have 2 or 3. Another plant, kangaroo grass, I think, has 5. So for me, I don't have the skill set to identify each and every grass plant that might be in a paddock. So it's really difficult for me, particularly when they don't have seed heads, to identify them. So how many leaves when are they going to be fully recovered? So for me, I sort of talk to farmers about whatever plant you think you want to be actively growing at this time of year, look after it. Whether that's cocksfoot, whether that's ryegrass, whether that's Phalaris, whatever that plant is, because you have noticed your stock like grazing it, because you've spent time watching them graze, you then go and look at that plant and go, has that plant got a blunt leaf that's still green and it's not growing as such, but still photosynthesizing, or is it starting to not photosynthesize and starting to die off? And that's the time that we need to go in and graze, because we now know that battery is fully charged.
Yeah, okay.
Now, you can choose to let it grow even further. And this is where the art and the science sort of meet for me, is you can choose to grow an extra leaf and it'll be growing quite nicely and well. And that's perfectly fine if you want to make sure that it's fully recovered. My bias is leaning towards grazing it at that point, because I want to balance that the amount of feed that it can grow, to balance that idea of if I graze it, the battery, there's that communication of the plant to the soil and the fungi. So getting that balance between stimulating that extra carbon in the soil to how much the animal is eating, and also balancing that light, maintaining the one thing I didn't talk about with the growing point is it needs light at that soil interface. And so if our plants get too high, too tall, and light is not getting to the base of those plants at that the growing point will move to where the light is hitting. Now, if that happens, then the tiller will be halfway up the stem of the mother plant and not have a chance to grow its own root system.
Could that let in some other plants too then?
Yes.
Or even possibly weeds?
Yeah, absolutely. So what then happens is, and the classic is, if you go across a paddock that's been locked up for hay, you'll often see tufts of grass where there's this tuft that's got this sort of dead bit in the middle of it and green circle around the outside of these tillers because the dead bit in the middle is all the tillers that happened were above where the mower went through and took them all, and none of them were able to sit in the middle. But all around the green is the outside where the tillers were able to get light, where they were able to stay at the interface. So finding the balance, it's an art form. There's no, that's the challenge of it. I always say in the courses, I enjoy this part of it. I enjoyed doing it as a dairy farmer, and dairy farmers have some advantages over beef and sheep and other grazing mechanisms. And one of those feedbacks was the milk vat tells me how I've done my grazing today, and have I got it right or not? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? And the results of that. So, it's only a handful of times a year where I was getting it bang on. They got the balance right. So it's really difficult, but I think it's really achievable to get it 80% right.
And what about during a drought, like where we can't move stock?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to, again, not move them. Understand that plant, it's got tough for them. So they've just hunkered down. They've gone dormant. They've basically said it's too tough. It's either too dry. It can be too wet as well. We'd like to see that again, but often it's too dry or too wet. It just goes, nah, I'm just going to go to sleep. Just going to go dormant. One of the challenges for people is they might have them in a containment area, and they might be, saying, well, this portion of my farm is going to be, I'm going to have to do something with it. So that's when the plough might come out. I've basically stuffed it because of whatever my context is. I've got some breeding stock that I just want to feed and keep because they're really important to me. And there was certainly in our dairy farm, there's certainly cows that I remember clearly and know and miss even now still, because you just know the effort that goes into those. So everyone's context is different. So you might bugger up a paddock, and then the challenge is that you might see these green shoots when the break happens and you want to get out on it. But the challenge is not to go out too early, because that's coming from the battery. And if we get out there too early, you might damage that battery too much. Now, it's a balance. Again, it's a balance. Everything is a balance. At this time of year, you might get away with damaging the battery once at this time of year, because knowing that the spring is going to give us a chance to recover. Let's hope.
Well, that's part A with Jason McAinch, packed with insight, practical wisdom, and a few good laughs too. But we're not done yet. In part B, we'll dig even deeper into rotational grazing, plant recovery, carbon, and some big ideas for the future of farming. Stand by, you won't want to miss it. In the meantime, keep your hands dirty and your spirits high.